Tansei, thank you for supporting the work that we do. The UDR Cast is a full-time job, takes a lot of work. I have a lot of people helping me, supporting me behind the scenes, and basically really trying to support the people who listen to it. I do the UDR Cast out of the passion of my heart, and sometimes, it gets hard to make it happen. But we as a team try to join forces and get the content out. So I'm just asking you from my heart if you have an opportunity to maybe help support the podcast through donations, a cup of coffee a month, a cup of coffees a month. Check out my Patreon account. We're accepting subscribers and donations there. Also, if you want to click onto my website, BILLWARDLIFE, there's a button there, it takes you to the Patreon. And, if we're helping you or your family or understanding, just think about giving us a hand up so we can keep creating great content. And if you have any suggestions on what you might want us to talk about, leave it in the comments on the website. Thank you. Hi. Welcome everybody to the UDR Cast, Uncover, Discover, Recover, coming to you live from the Recovery Capital of Canada. I'm your host, Bill Ward, and today we have an awesome friend of mine, special guest, call him King Ryder, known as Ryder King. Is that your real name?
My real name is Russell Goodrider.
Russell Goodrider.
Yeah.
How'd you come up with King?
King's my biological mom's last name, so... how I became a good rider was she was married prior to being with my dad, and somehow I ended up with the Good Rider name. And she dropped the King last name, which was our original last name. So I'm not even really a good rider. So it just kind of just baffles me, even to this day, why she made that decision. So.
Yeah, 10-4. Well, good to have you here. Thanks for coming, bro.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What have you been up to these days?
Oh, just working, being a parent, being a husband, staying sober, recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This series that we're doing is parenting and recovery, kind of walking through your life, kind of, seeing when you had kids and what kind of parent you were and kind of like, I know you're a great parent today, right? And that's why you're here, and you do your best.
Yeah.
Maybe let's not put like big labels on you, but I know you do your best to make your family number one and your kids number one. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that today. So yeah. What's it like parenting now, being sober, 3 years?
Yeah, coming up 3 years in February. I had to become a parent all over again, from, my oldest son, he's 25, and, when I had him, I was 16, and so being 16 years old and having a kid, you're still at home yourself, being parented, and having to move out and get a job, drop out of school and everything. With, for me, I grew up with my stepmom, who was like in and out of my life for the most part of it. But my biological mom, she was in my life a couple times when I was younger. And it really wasn't a good situation with her. She drank a lot, and so did my stepmom, right? They both drank, they both were in a residential school system. So, they had a lot of their own trauma and all the intergenerational trauma that was like coming down through them, so growing up with, and then my dad, my dad's non-native, he's German-Hungarian, and, he didn't drink a day of my life, he died 45 years sober,
No way.
Yeah, so, so I had a really good parenting on one side, and I had really broken parenting on the other side, and to, be 16, trying to put both of those together, still picking up all the bad stuff from the abuse that I was going through, and try not to pass that on to my kids, right? So, being stuck in that lifestyle where I was always going to, young offender centers and in and out of like group homes and stuff, for me to be a parent, it wasn't possible.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have that mental capacity to be a dad at 16.
Yeah.
I thought I did.
Yeah.
And I, don't get me wrong. I was proud, from the time that my son was born, that even to today, I'll always be proud of my kids. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But, as time went on and I would be in and out of that system, my kids weren't in my life because my oldest son, my dad and my stepmom ended up taking him because neither me or his mom were capable of taking care of a kid, right? So, yeah, coming through to today, like, I look back on it and it baffles me that, just sitting here thinking about it, it baffles me that, what was I doing? That's all I can think. Like, what was I doing? What was I thinking? I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what I was doing.
Just trying to do the best with what you had, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I look back at my life as a parent, and I'm same thing. Like, what the fuck was I doing? And like, I just had a interview that I did, and we talked about, passing on the things that I never really knew I was passing on in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
But I can only give away what I am. I can only give away what I have. And I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of judgment. I had a lot of negative things that I was giving away to my kids. And, didn't realize some of that until I was, 3-4 years sober, where, it was plain to see that they were like that.
Yeah.
But they were like that because I was like that.
Yeah.
And, over the years, they've changed a lot, and I've changed a lot. And the hope is that we all continue to keep changing. And like, so with you, regardless, you probably passed on a lot of bad things to them as a parent over the years, right? And now you do your best to pass on good things.
Yeah. There was a lot of, one thing I didn't do, I didn't do the whole abuse thing, physically. But, I think, like, looking back at it, just that abandonment issue, me being abandoned, that's how I felt by my biological mom, right? That I wasn't good enough for her, right? And, I have a really good relationship with my oldest son. His name's Matt. And, even though he was taken away from me, I still remained in his life till he was 7. And then me and his mom had a falling out. And, essentially, she had a new family, I had a new family. And I didn't see him for another 10 years after that, right? I didn't get to see him till he was 17. And by then, all the stuff that, like, his mom, they had their relationship, I had my relationships. And somewhere in the midst of that, he fell into addiction himself, right? So when I was reunited with him, and that was back in 2018, he was in addiction himself. And I was in addiction, so I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to be a dad. I still didn't know how to be a dad at that point because, in that time where, I was a healthy parent, I lost all that again once I was lost, essentially when I was lost in addiction. So, to spend that time with him, it was like we'd party, and, that's not something I'm proud of, but we partied, we drank together and stuff, right? But now, to have him back in my life, when he was stuck in addiction, I brought him out here from BC. He came out here and, he moved in and we're like, our house is cramped. He was sleeping in the closet, right? And, he was still kind of in that partying ways, right? And I was like, I had to lay down some guidelines and some rules, like, you can't drink here, you can't come home drunk. And he tested the line a few times, and it would do it, but I'm not going to turn him away. But also, I also had to show him that you're just hurting yourself, and like today he's got over a year clean himself off of the hard drugs, right? We had a big scare with him he had an overdose. And I was at work, and so my coworker had to drive me home. And for that, when he came out of it, I took time off of work for a couple of days, stayed home with him. Because it was scary, right? It's different for me to see other people, go through that and overdose. And, that's scary, to be there to save them. But when it's your own child,
Yeah.
that weighs deep on you, right? So, I took that and, you know, I had to start leading by example, and showing him, hey, like, this is what recovery has given me. This is what my connection to, my higher power, to the creator is, and just show him that, like, yes, that life is always going to be there. We can't change that, but this is the life. This is the road I'm walking today. And, I'm learning how to be a parent again.
Yeah.
And I'm being a good one, like, I'm not to brag or nothing, but, my kids, even in addiction, my kids came first because I took myself out of that equation and distanced myself from them because I was no good to them, because I wasn't who I was. I wasn't their dad anymore. I was somebody that was stuck in addiction, so.
And also teaching them what it takes, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is recovery and what does it take, and doing the hard things that we got to do to build this life, right? And another thing you said, I can't remember. Anyway, let's backtrack all the way back. How'd you grow up?
So like I mentioned earlier, I grew up with my dad not being Native and my mom being Native. So I grew up like...
Down in Kainai?
Yeah, so Kainai and Brockett, and Bikani, right? So I would go from like... I would go from the Crow's Nest Pass to Brockett and to Kainai. And that's when I'd be like around my biological mom. And like I said, I wasn't really around her that much. So with that, like, so with my stepmom, I grew up with all my family from her side. And it was like I was stuck between two worlds and I couldn't find where I fit in, because when I would go to the reserve, my cousins would all be like, well, you're not Native. They'd always be like, you're white, and they would like kind of like oust me a little bit, right? And like give me a hard time, and then going to school, in just really tiny little village. It's called Lumbrick. A lot of people know where Lumbrick Falls is, right? So, not to take offense to anybody, but there's a lot of rednecks out there. And unfortunately, being the only Native in that school, you're really susceptible to being bullied, and I was. So I had all that going on, and it was just like, it was a lot of confusion growing up, and so we ended up moving around a few times, and once we moved to the Crow's Nest Pass, because at that time we're living in Cowley. It's even smaller than Lumbrick, I think. They're about the same. Anyways, so when I moved to the Crow's Nest Pass, it was a little bit more different, because there was different nationalities there. Like, there was East Indian, there was Spanish people, there was like a more wide variety. There's other natives there too. So I wasn't singled out, but everything that I took from that, growing up in those other places, I took that with me, and, it was something that I held on to, along with all the other stuff that was going on in my life at that time. And, I started growing resentful, to both my parents, even though they were like, my dad was trying his hardest to be there for me, to support me. Right. But at the same time, I was like, why, like, for the longest time, I didn't even think he was my dad, cause he was white and I was Native. So there was a lot of just, like I said, there was a lot of feeling of not fitting in. So yeah, it was tough.
Too white for the Browns and too brown for the whites, and
Yeah.
don't know where we belong, and I can relate to that as well.
Yeah.
And so your stepmom and your father, did your dad end up taking custody of you because your birth mom was too messed up?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So in Lethbridge, there used to be an old bar. There was like the Alec Arms, the Bridge Inn, and the Coal Bank. So those are like the main Native bars back in the day, right? So the Bridge Inn was the big one. And my dad was telling me that when he took me, he used to send my mom money for me because he was working and stuff like that. And, he would be trying to see me and he wouldn't be able to see me. And how he took me was, I was like 3 months old or something, and I was in the lobby with like my teenage cousin who was like taking care of me while my mom was in the bar drinking, right? And back in those days, that was like pretty normal, And he came in and he seen me and he just scooped me up, you know. She didn't fight it or nothing, right? It's like she knew that I'd have a better life with him than I would with her.
That's how he got custody of you, is he just took you out of the lobby at the Bridge Inn
Yep.
and then raised you from there.
Yeah.
And then your stepmom, was she also from Kainai area?
She was from Brockett.
Rocket?
Yeah, she was from Begunny.
Did your stepmom and your real mom know each other?
Yeah, they did. And you know, they used to fight, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Cuz like you know, like I said, Bridge Inn was the native bar where everybody go drink. So, you know, I remember like a couple times, you know, my dad would be like, "Hey, we need to go to Lethbridge. We need to go pick up mom." And I'd be like a little bit confused, you know, because I'm like, do we going to pick up like my real mom? Her name was Josephine, right? Or are we going to pick up Delma, my stepmom? And he'd be like, we're going to pick up mom. And I'd be like, okay, so we're going to pick up Delma. Because like I never looked at Josephine as a mother figure, right? Yeah.
Okay. So as you grow up in these towns and like with a bit of prejudice, a lot of confusion going on within your own being, did you follow cultural paths at all? Did you go to school on the res at all?
Yeah, so, you know, like as for like the cultural bit, you know, like even though like my I'm gonna call her my mom, right? So
Delma.
Delma. So, you know, she was still really, you know, into our culture, right? That's one thing that like, you know, I'm really grateful for. You know, like a lot of people of our like elders too, you know. So many of them, once they got out of residential school, you know, it was like our culture was taken away from them, right? And they left it, you know, they never regained it once they left, you know. So I was really fortunate that she held on to that culture, you know, and she didn't let that culture die. So, you know, one of our family members used to be a medicine man. His name was Joe Crochew Sr. He was very well renowned too. You know, she used to be his home care worker. So I spent a lot of time out there on like they lived out in the country. So I spent a lot of time out there and he didn't speak English, right? So my mom would like translate, you know, what he'd be like telling me stories and, you know, I got my first Indian name from him and everything. You know, I still got that name, you know, I still need to make that transition to, you know, to getting my manhood name. So, yeah. As for like school, you know, I did a lot of homeschooling. I did homeschooling and I didn't as much go to school on the res. Yeah, I wouldn't say that I went to school on the res. I tried to. But
Did you spend a lot of time on the res?
I would spend so much time on the res growing up. It was, you know, like I'd spend the summers there. And, you know, my dad, you know, and that was the thing, like when my mom always kept her place on the reserve when they were together, you know, so I'd travel back and forth all the time, right?
And I'm sure you're seeing drug and alcohol around being on the res. And when did you start dabbling?
So I remember like being at house parties, you know, either at my mom's or at my auntie and uncle's. And I always like remember this so clear that, you know, I remember one time I was sitting on her lap and everybody was drinking, they're all laughing and, you know, and I'm like sitting on there and I'm like seeing all these beer bottles and cans that they're drinking out of. So I remember like picking up on and taking a drink, you know, and somebody in that party looking at me and seeing me do it and thinking it's funny, you know, as I'm taking a drink, you know. And so I'm like, okay, well, they think it's funny and I'm going to make them laugh. So, you know, I'd start drinking, you know. So that was probably about 6 or 7 of my first drinks of alcohol. But, you know, when I was 8, you know, that's when I started actually like drinking, you know, stealing beers in 3rd grade, stealing beers. And my friend, you know, his dad, you know, and this is in the Crow's Nest Pass, right? So his dad drank a lot too. So we'd both steal alcohol from our parents and, you know, we'd go to school. Lunchtime we'd drink, you know, and it just went on from there, you know. But, you know, being on the res, like, you know, there's always lots of drinking, you know, and it wasn't like, you know, there was like no fentanyl and like, You know, I'm sure cocaine was around and stuff like that, but it was always pills, right? You always hear people like overdosing and doing pills and stuff like that, or, you know, so it's like everywhere I went when I was a kid, you know, minus my Uncle Joe's, I always just remember just people drinking, you know, and it got even to a point where I'd be like, I didn't want to go, you know, because I knew that that party was only good for a while, you know, until somebody said the wrong thing. And then everybody would raise hell, and it would be just people fighting. And you know, as a kid, you know, growing up around that, you know, you got a whole house full of people fighting. You know, I remember me and my cousins like taking off and sitting in the field and just waiting for the cops to come, you know, because it was only a matter of time before they came. Yeah.
What a way to grow up, eh?
Yeah.
Full blown drinker by 8 years old. When did you realize, or did you even realize, that you were, you know, had a alcohol problem?
I probably have to say, like, you know, I knew by the time I was like 12 that, you know, I had a problem. I didn't know it was a problem, but I knew that I had to have it every weekend, you know. I knew I had to have it every time that I seen somebody drinking or passed out. You know, I knew I had to have a drink, you know. Didn't taste good, but I liked the way it felt, made me feel, you know. So.
Did you black out as a young drinker?
Oh, yeah, numerous times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember having alcohol poisoning, too. I remember being like, I was like 13 years old, so drunk that I couldn't even stand up. And everything was just spinning, and I'm just, you know, laying in a tub full of puke, you know.
Did any of your friends or family say, like, dude, you got a drinking problem and you're like a preteen? Like, did people point it out, or like maybe even some of your peers where they would like to drink sometimes too, but they would look at you and be like, you're fucked, bro?
Yeah, you know, because like, I would say that I started noticing that alcohol and my lifestyle at that age was a problem probably when all my friends weren't allowed to hang around with me no more, you know? And my friends shifted from like my age group up until like, you know, like 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, right? And just older, you know, with the party crowd, you know? So that was, I didn't physically have anybody come and be like, hey, you got a drinking problem. But I remember going to court one time and my dad pleading with the judge to put restraining orders on my friends. Because he's like, every time he's with them or he's around them, he just drinks. And he ends up in here, or he goes to jail, you know? And, you know, it wasn't until, like, I got to Lethbridge Young Offender Center, and I realized, listening to everybody else, that, like, they either had, like, pill problems or alcohol problems, and them being told that they have a problem. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm doing that same thing, but I don't have a problem, you know? It's everybody else around me that has that problem. You know, denial right from the start.
What kind of shit were you getting into to end up in custody?
Break and enters, you know. Always do break and enters to get alcohol and money, you know. My dad, me and him used to build cars, you know. He would try to keep me off, like, you know, out of that. Try to keep me on the straight path. My dad was a mechanic, you know, he was a mechanic from the army and stuff like that. So I've always been into mechanics. So we'd like work on cars, and he bought me a 74 Dodge Charger SC, and I remember we're working on it all the time, and I'd like steal it to like go do break and enters in like different towns and like farms and stuff to like feed my addiction at like 14 years old, you know. And I remember thinking that it was cool, because I remember like idolizing like my older family members that partied, you know. And like, you know, one thing about my family, you know, that I kind of like left out back there at the beginning was, so on Josephine, on my biological mom's side, you know, I have 8 other siblings. I had 8 other siblings, you know, and my oldest one, he got murdered in Edmonton. And that just like set off like a landslide of like broken heart and loneliness, you know, like, and, you know, my brothers, you know, they either overdosed, committed suicide, or drank themselves to death, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's all before I was 10 years old, you know?
So how many siblings did you have?
So on Josephine's side, I had eight other brothers.
Are they all still? No, well, they're not.
There's none alive.
They're all dead.
Yeah.
From the lifestyle.
From the lifestyle. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I like think back to it. I remember them, you know, like even though she wasn't a part of my life that much, you know, they were, you know.
How?
And you know, they would come see my dad. They would come out to like when we lived in Cali and stuff. They would like randomly show up. They'd like hitchhike or they'd drive out and stuff like that and come visit with me, come spend a couple of days. And it was always like that, you know. They were always connected to me, you know, and I'll always keep them connected to me,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And yeah, you know, and I'm grateful for that.
So you're in and out of not CYOC, but the Lethbridge Young Offender Center, and you know, life of crime is starting to happen, and your dad's trying to keep you out of it the best that he can. Your dad sounds like a pretty amazing man.
Yeah, he was.
And where did your life of crime and addiction take you? I know that you've been on the streets and you've been in jail, and you know, like you've been part of the gangs.
Yeah.
So where did it take you?
So it took me to, you know, it started out in Lethbridge, you know, and like, so from Lethbridge, Edmonton, Vancouver, you know, it took me to a lot of dark places. You know, I remember being out in Hastings and like being like, you know, like 17 years old, and, you know, you're like thinking to myself, how did I ever make it out here? Like, what am I doing out here? You know, like I'm a dad, you know, I'm still a kid, you know, but you know, that's what
drugs were you using then?
you know, by the time I was like 16, I was hooked on the morphine, you know, and then when I went to the pen, you know, I started dabbling with the heroin. And
Which pen?
first time I went to the pen, I went to Matsqui Institution out on the coast. Well, not on the coast, but out in BC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, you know, I look back at that time and, you know, my life is where it was to where I am now. You know, that first, you know, morphine for me was like one thing. But the heroin, it would like just had that lock on me, you know. And I was able to like stay off it for a long time. But it wasn't until like I ended up actually like homeless in Calgary. Because I was on the run at that time. And I ended up getting back into it. And I just remember how much it like just destroyed my life and how fast it was, you know. You know. And by then, like, you know, my dad had passed away in like 2010. And that was a big significant thing for me to like, that was a big loss for me. And
where were you when he passed?
I was being a scared little boy, you know. I was, you know, and I regret this every day, even to today, you know, when it took me a long time to forgive myself, you know. So he passed away in Lethbridge in 2010, and at that time I just gotten out of jail, and it was like it was just really ironic how everything worked out, like played out, and you know, like when I think back to it, like showed me how strong a father's love is for his kids, right? So he got sick. Like my dad was like, he'd passed away when he was 79, right? So he was older, but he was healthy like until he was like 77, and he caught pneumonia, and you know his lungs just gave out after that, pretty much. So I remember I was on the reserve, and I kept making excuses why I couldn't make it to the hospital, because I was scared. You know, like I said, I was a scared little boy. That's where I was.
Mm-hmm.
I was scared that I was going to lose him, and deep down I knew I was going to lose him. And I just drank, and I was just drinking and drinking and drinking, and you know, I finally gathered up the courage to go, and I was waiting for my ride, and it's, you know, I was waiting for my ride that day, and my mom came and told me, she's like, hey, your dad passed away. And, like I drank that day until from 2010 till 2022,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
That was a big void in your life.
Yeah, that's all I had in my life, my whole life. Inconsistency for a parent, I had my dad my whole life. He would bend over backwards for me, was always just there for me, And at that time, I couldn't be there for him because I didn't want to lose him, right? So yeah, it was a big loss for me.
Mm-hmm. And did that send you spinning even worse?
Yeah, like so it like set off the constant binge. Like I would be on binges for like months at a time, still trying to work, still trying to hold down a relationship, and my kids' mom, her name's Jazz, and at that time we were together, right? And I chose alcohol over her and over my kids, and and always be in jail, and she got to a point where she was like, if you don't stop, I'm done waiting for you, I'm done babysitting you. And so my next big loss was like losing her, and that kept me like that at that point. That's like all I felt I had left.
How many kids did you have at that point?
At that point I had 5 kids.
All with her?
No, not with her. Yeah. So at that time me and her had only had the one, right? But she accepted my kids as her own. So, like at that point, like it was tough for me, like thinking back on it right now. And I just got like caught up in all this chaos, and just continued on with the jail and, trying to be a parent,
Mm-hmm.
but I was failing miserably, and, and at that point, I think like the best thing I did for my kids was take that step back, and so they didn't have to see me like that.
Mm-hmm. Was that hard to do, or was it easy to do because you were so addicted?
It was hard. It was hard because like I love my kids with all my heart, right? As you know, with your kids, like it's hard. Like just the thought of it is probably a scary thought, right? You've been through that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me to take that step back, it hurt, And then I used that plus the loss of my dad and my relationship as my fuel for my addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how did you get into the gangs? And
So I ended up getting into the gangs when I was in LYOC, in the youth system.
did you get recruited?
Yeah, like there was, at that time it was like there was like all the white kids, and then there was like the native kids, but the native kids like branched off into like 2 different groups, and there was the Bloods and the Crips, right? And that's a big thing back home, on in Kainai. So I ended up getting like tied up with them, and once you get into that cycle, it's like, your freedom at the same time goes away in a sense, right? Because you're spending a lot of time inside, right? And yes, it was on the streets, but it was also in the jails, right? Especially down there. So, with that gang life, it's like growing up in it, and then, like you try to take yourself out of the equation whatever way you can, right? To have some room to breathe, I guess, right? And I tried that so many times, but I was so caught up in everything that it's like I blink my eyes and I'm back in, And it got so normal for me to be in jail, to be locked up for long periods of time, that it was like turning on a light switch in my head, So I'd get out and I'd turn that switch off as soon as I get arrested, or I'm gonna do something, and I know I would turn that switch back on, and it was like I would just shut down all my emotion and just go back to being a person that I didn't want to be anymore,
Mm-hmm.
So as time went on, it's like just being stuck in that life in jail, you know, like jail gangs or prison gangs are serious, right?
When you said you would shut the switch off and on, elaborate on that a bit.
So, you know, this one time like really, and this is when I noticed it too. I got arrested, and I was going back to, they were transferring me from Brockett to Lethbridge, and I remember sitting in the back of the sheriff's van, and I'm like feeling all this anxiety, and I'm like, because I'm leaving my family, and I'm like, okay, well, you just got to do this again, you know. And it was like, in my mind, I just started shutting off emotion, you know. I'm like, okay, well, I got to stop feeling like that, you know. It's like already preparing myself. So when we pulled back up, you know, I was already in a whole different mindset, you know, and I was all like laughing and joyful, you know, and like shooting the shit with the guards, being like, hey man, what's up? I'm back home, you know. And, or they'd be like, oh, you're back home. You didn't last that long this time, you know, you know, and it was just the norm, you know. So for that switch to like come back on once I got out, you know, it'd be like, okay, I start feeling these feelings again, you know. I'd be like, okay, yeah, it's good. And then it got to the point where it's like, I don't want to feel these feelings anymore because I know what's going to happen, you know, so I'll just keep it turned off. You know? And I just taped the switch down so I wouldn't have to feel those emotions no more.
Roger.
Yeah.
And so when you came into recovery, you came in Calgary, right? You were in Calgary?
Yeah.
Were you on the streets?
Yeah, so...
and you've had all your kids by then?
Yeah, so I had all my kids were born except for my daughter. She was just, because she was born this year.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I was still in like contact with some of my kids, and like I'd mentioned, you know, like my oldest son, me and him were in addiction together, and I really wasn't talking to my other kids. Like I talked to them, but I would keep them at a fair distance away, right? And I remember like not being like, me and my daughter, we didn't speak for like 5 years, you know, and that was like my baby girl, right? So we didn't speak for 5 years, because she told me, she's like, you're not my dad, you know, like, this is not my dad. You know, this guy you are right here, this guy's a monster, you know. That hurt, you know, for her to compare me from being like a dad to like not being that, you know. It was tough, but yeah, so I had all my kids, but I kept them at a distance. My oldest son was up here, and then he ended up going back to BC, and he was out there, and he got sober for a bit. You know, he started working on the mines and everything, and you know, he was doing good. And you know, I would always stay in contact with him. You know,
But you and him were on the streets together here?
yeah, we were on the streets together. We had a place, you know, for like 6-7 months, and then we ended up losing it. You know, rent wasn't paid.
Yeah.
Nothing was paid.
When you were on the streets, where'd you sleep?
That's the thing. I didn't sleep. You know, you know, I'd always like have places to go, because I'd always be like in the midst of everything downtown, selling drugs and, you know, doing all that, and you know, I'd always meet people or sell drugs to people, and they would like let me stay at their place. You know, let me crash there. You know, whether it be a week, 2 weeks, however long I needed, right? You know, there was times that I remember one time I like walked into the DI, and I was like so fresh to being like homeless, and I remember like walking in and sitting in there, and they're like, "Are you high? Are you drunk or anything?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm high. I just need to sleep." And I was like, "Where do I sleep?" And they pointed to, they're like, I was thinking I was gonna go upstairs or something, right? And because I'd been in there before, but like not in that kind of like scenario. And they're like, "Oh, you got to go sleep in there." And I remember like walking in there, and it just smelled like it. Just the smell hit me, and you know, there's that mixed with like people puking and people moaning, and I was just like, man, I like remember like laying on, like they didn't even have a mat. I remember just like laying on the floor, and I'm like, I can't do this, you know. And I'd been up for like 2 weeks. It felt like I was to say I was up for like a week, but it felt like 2 weeks. And I remember like getting up and being like, going to look in the washroom and being like, I can't be here, you know? And I remember like walking out of there and like telling myself, I will never sleep here. You know, I need to do something with my life. But I was like stuck in addiction. And by that time in my life, all I really knew how to do, like, was sell drugs, you know, sell drugs. You know, I used to be an iron worker, you know, a framer, concrete finisher. And like I worked all those good jobs, you know, I made good money and stuff like that. But it was too long to go get that money, you know. So I needed that quick money. And I remember like walking out of the drop-in center and being like, I'm never gonna be here again.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I never did end up back there again, you know. But I still stayed in that area, you know, caught up in that lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I made it to Alpha House a couple times, and it was all. I'm not gonna say it was all right, but it was better than what the drop-in center was.
Were you a violent guy?
Yeah, I was. You know. Yeah, I actually had like, you know, from like all the abuse that I did suffer and all the like the bullying when I was younger. And you know, just being in that system in the jail system and the criminal system, you know, where everything strives on survival and violence, you know, you have no choice but to be like that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because I'll tell you one thing, you know, the guy that's nice to everybody and is like, is not gonna survive in there, you know. It's like, who's the bigger dog, you know? And you know, I was like never the biggest guy, but, you know, like in my mind, I was the biggest guy, you know, and you know, and I had to be violent, you know, I had to not be the person I am today, you know. Otherwise, I wouldn't have survived,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
So how'd you finally? So you're sitting in the detox, and you're like, I gotta fucking do something with my life.
Yeah.
And then, where from there did you finally do something, and what was it?
So I think like the first time I went to detox, it was like in 2016, and I remember being like in there, and
Renfrew?
Alpha House.
Okay.
Yeah, Alpha House. And I remember sitting in there being like, and I remember they mentioned treatment, and I didn't know, it scared me, like, you know, the thought of something different, you know, because like at that point in time, and I say this a lot of times, is like, you know, like everybody's rock bottom's different. My rock bottom, I would hit it, and then I would make peace with it, and I'd accept it. And then I'd like let it get worse and worse. And then I would be like, okay, this is it. So I'd go to detox. And I did that like 3 or 4 times. I ended up getting sick. I ended up punching this guy who owed me money. And I remember like my hand got so infected, I ended up getting a blood infection and going to the hospital because at the time, at that time I had a roommate and everything. We're living in Forest Lawn, and you know, her mom used to live in the apartment kind of behind us, but it was all in the same building. And I remember I was like laying on the bed, and I was like going to sleep, and then I like woke up to her mom being on top of me, being like, Ryder, and I'm like what's going on, you know? She's like, you stopped breathing, and I'm like, oh no. I'm like, I'm okay. And she's like, no, we're gonna call an ambulance. And I'm like, no, don't call an ambulance. That's embarrassing. I'll catch a cab. So I ended up going to the hospital. But at the same time, you know, I was using intravenously. And at some point in time, I reused the needle. So all that bacteria in there, plus the blood infection, went to my heart. And I ended up with it's called endocarditis. Mm-hmm. So it affects you like your heart valves in your heart, and it's a really bad infection. And I remember when I went there for my finger, they did all this blood work on me, and they're like, we can't essentially fix your finger because it's been so long. So I had this big open wound on my hand, and it was swollen, and I had to be on an IV. And then I skipped the IV, and I was just cleaning it. And this number kept calling my phone. And I never used to answer these numbers that would be unavailable numbers because I'd always think it was the cops or somebody. So I'd never answer it. And it called for about a week. And I remember like finally checking my voicemail, and it was a nurse from the hospital. And she's like, "Hi, this is nurse so-and-so from Peter Lougheed. You need to come in. We found something with your blood work." And right away, my brain goes to panic mode. It's like, what did I get myself into, right? You know, was I reckless when I was, you know, using with somebody, or did I have sex with somebody and I caught something, you know? So I was scared. So a whole nother week went by of me contemplating. And at that same time, I'm like looking at myself and watching myself like get sicker, you know, like I was losing weight, and I kept having like these head rushes, and I'd like almost like pass out. What was happening is my heart valves were sticking together, and I get lightheaded, and I hear this like humming in my head, right? And I was like, this is bad. So I finally went to the hospital, and I told them who I was, and right away they're like put me right into emergency. And they did like, it was almost like a little intervention they did, you know, between the nurses, and they had all these specialists come in, and they're like, you can't leave. Like, basically, if you leave, you're going to die. They're like, you could go to sleep and you could not wake up. And I'm like, okay, you know, it's better than what I'm going through right now, you know? Because at that point, you know, I was like, I was defeated, you know, and that was in 2019. And I was defeated then. And I'm like, well, I'll take my chances. And they're like, well, if you leave, we're going to call the cops, you know? And I'm like, well, call them, you know? And at that time, I called one of my best friends. He's in recovery now, too. But I ended up calling him, and I took him like my little brother, right? And we met when we were on the street and we're homeless. And, you know, I called him. I'm like, hey, I'm at the hospital. They're trying to make me stay. You know, I got something wrong with me. And he's like, well, I'll be right there. So, you know, he drove down, and he's like, well, can you explain to me what's going on? And they're like, who are you? And he's like, oh, I'm his brother. And they're like, is this your brother? I'm like, yeah, it's my brother. You know, so they like release all my medical information. They're talking about what's going on with me. And they're like, he turns around and he tells me, he's like, bro, you should just stay. And I'm like, it's like, well, I really don't want to. I'm like, you know, like, I'm going to be dope sick. You know, I don't have no alcohol to like come down off of the drugs. Like, I don't have nothing, you know? And, you know, the doctor's like, that's your biggest worry? I'm like, yeah. It's like, you know what it's like to be dope sick? He's like, no. I was like, well, then don't judge me on that, you know? And long story short, I ended up staying, you know? And I was there for 3.5 months, you know, on intravenous, like 4 times a day. And it was like the strongest antibiotics they could put you on, right? Intravenously. And man, I just remember like being in there, and it was just like feeling like I was in jail, you know? And at that point I was like, I should probably stop, you know? But I didn't. And I remember I got released, and I went back to the same house that I was living at. And it was only a matter of time before I ended up back, you know, using again, like fully using again. Because in the hospital I was using too, right? Thinking I was sneaky and stuff, but I wasn't, because I do my blood work every day to see how it's coming along. And the doctor keeps telling me, like, you need to quit doing the drugs. I'm like, I'm not doing drugs. You know, I was like so much in denial that like the evidence is right there. Like, look at you, you know? And yeah, you know, addiction had me by the balls, you know, and it was just ruining my life.
So what year did you finally come in and start getting sober? So you're coming up on 3 years. We're 2025, so 2022?
Yeah, February 2nd, 2022.
So you went through COVID as a user for the most part, and then what was finally the breaking point?
I would say that the breaking point was like, you know, I ended up with like 2 ammonias, a really severe one. I was in Foothills Hospital. 2021 I ended up there, and they had to put tubes in my lungs. I had to carry around these 2 machines because I'd like been smoking so much fentanyl and all the crap that comes off of it, and, you know, just being out in the cold, it like, you know, it almost killed me. I couldn't breathe. I was like drowning in like all this fluid. And I remember being there, and the nurse came up to me and she's like, "You ever think of like getting sober or getting help?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I've thought about it a couple times." And she's like, "Okay, I'll be back." And she came back and she had a pamphlet. She's like, "Oh, I could only find this one pamphlet, you know." And I'm like, "Okay, well, let's check it out." And it was Simon House. So I was like, "I'll check it out." So I held on to that pamphlet, right? Another year went by and I ended up getting hit by a car. And I remember like getting up off the ground and being like so winded and like in so much pain. And it was right by Sheldon Schumer downtown. And I remember like making it there and then like them like not attending to me because I was an addict, right? So like, you know, they prioritize everybody else there first. And so I left. I went to Peter Lougheed and I went in and I got admitted and I was there for like a month. They released me. And in that month I was like really contemplating, you know, like I don't want to do this no more, you know, like I'm done, you know. And I ended up like catching another pneumonia. And like, you know, in that lifestyle you're the last thing you're worried about is your health and taking care of yourself. So I make it back into the hospital and the doctor tells me, he's like, "You know what, the next time you come in here like this," he's like, you're going to be leaving in a body bag, you know. He's like, if you don't quit doing what you're doing, he's like, you should phone your kids and already make peace with them and let your family know that you're not going to make it. And I'm like, and that's stuck, you know. And at that time, you know, all my organs were starting to shut down. I put myself into early heart failure and it scared me. So when they were going to release me, so I was in there for like another month. They're going to release me and like, I was like, I need help. Like, you know, like I'm going to die. You know, I don't even know where that voice came from, you know. And it was just like, I was just scared, you know. And I remember the social worker telling me, she's like, "Well, have you ever thought of Detox or something?" I'm like, "Well, I called Detox, but they're full." She's like, "Well, I'll be back." She's like, "Let me make a call." So she called Alpha House and she came back and she's like, "I'll give you a one-way taxi voucher to Detox. No stops." She even wrote on top of the voucher in big letters, "No stops." And, you know, it's, that's when it started, you know? Yeah, it was good.
Was that your first time ever going to treatment?
You know, when I was 16, I got sent to treatment. It was either like I do longer in CYOC, in Calgary Young Offender Center, or go to treatment. And at that point, I was in denial. I didn't have a problem. But I was like, you know, if it's going to take some time off, I'll go to treatment. And I went there and I didn't pay attention to nothing. You know, I was just there to get out of jail. So, you know, I don't even look at it as going to treatment. I just look at it as going to like a minimum facility, right? Minimum security facility. So, yeah, so I'm going to say that like going to treatment this time was my first time going to treatment. Yeah.
And so you decided, fuck it, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
You went to Alpha House, detoxed.
Yeah.
From there, you went straight to the door of Simon House.
Yeah.
Did you understand what you were getting into at first?
I didn't, you know, I didn't even know like any of this existed, you know. I didn't know what recovery was. I thought it was sobriety, you know. And I remember like hearing about the 12 steps while I was there. I didn't understand them. I just remember like the big book because I read the big book a couple times, but just to like read the stories because like when I was locked up, it's like every unit you go to in jail, there's a big book, right? So I remember I'd like pick it up and people would be like, "Oh, this is like the sober people Bible," and I'd be like, "Okay, I'll check it out," you know. And I'm like reading all these stories, and I'd be like, "Well, that doesn't sound so bad," you know, like their stories, you know, because to me my story was a lot more drastic than theirs, right? And that like reflects back to when I say everybody's rock bottom's different, right? So I remember when I got there, and I knew, even though I was a little bit apprehensive at first, of like putting up my hand for like a sponsor and talking to people and sharing, you know, I just sat back and I listened, you know. I always just been that person to sit back and observe, read the room, read everybody, you know, and that's what I did for like my first 2 weeks, you know, go to meetings, just hear what everybody had to say. And, you know, there was guys that got there at the same time as me. And, they put up their hand and get a sponsor. And like, as time went on, I'd see little changes in them, right? Or people that were working with sponsors that, I hear their story of how like when they would share of like when they got there and what had changed, over their period of time being there. And I'm like, I'm gonna get a sponsor. And I remember the first person I asked, I was like, put up my hand it was at one of the alumni meetings, and I put up my hand and I'm like, I need a sponsor. And then the guy's like, okay, well, we'll talk after. And I remember it's like sitting there and he's like, well, I kind of have a lot of sponsees right now. And I could be your temporary sponsor, but like, let's meet next week. And, he was like, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I was like, okay. So I met him that following week and, he's like, I'll sponsor you, and he took me through my first set of steps.
Nice.
Yeah. And so it was good.
And you had a big change in the first set.
Yeah. And, to have him break it down to me was like, it was good. And I was always like one of those people that like, yeah, like I sat back and I observed, but I wasn't scared to ask a question either, So I really had to step outside of my comfort zone in that sense, because if I didn't, I probably wouldn't have got it.
Mm-hmm. When did we meet? How far into your journey did we meet?
I think I was like 6 months into my journey. We met in, I believe it was July 2022. Yeah, I was in sober living.
Was it sober living where we first met?
Yeah, we did the healing circle.
Mm-hmm.
Me, you, and your dad, and a couple of the guys from the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you stayed there for not quite a year?
Yeah, just under a year. And in that time, it was, like I always stayed in contact with Jazz, right? That's one thing, like she always made sure that me and my son, Kingston, had that relationship. Even though like I wouldn't be around him, she'd be like, just, because he would always ask about me, like, hey, where's my dad? She'd be like, well, call him. And I'd always answer her call. Even if it was just to be like, hey, how you doing? I love you, and stuff like that. And, he'd be like, okay, I just want to make sure you're okay, because he knew, like, she didn't hide it from him. She didn't be like, oh, your dad's off like fighting in a war or something. She was like, your dad's sick right now. He's not doing good. So you should stay in contact with him. And, so we stayed in contact, and in that time, she fell into addiction too. She got caught up in addiction, and she kind of like hit a rock bottom as well.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, like I called her and I'd be like, hey, guess where I'm at? I'm in treatment. And she'd be like, cool. I just reach out to her all the time, and that kind of like gave her the motivation to like be like, hey, he can do it, then why can't I do it? And so she ended up coming to Calgary, and I remember like meeting up with her, and it was just like, you have a bond. Like, I don't know, like there's people you meet in your life that like you have that bond with, and it's like, it's almost like it's unbreakable. Like it's just feels natural to be around them.
Mm.
So that's how it is for me with her. And yeah, we just, became friends.
So in your journey of recovery, is that where you found most of your culture connection? And are you connected or connecting to the culture?
Yeah, like my culture's always been like a part of my life. And now that I'm like back, now that I'm in recovery, right, I'm getting back into like I like enjoy going to like round dances and like Sundance and just getting back in touch with my culture,
Mm-hmm.
And I found that that's like one thing that's like really grounded me is our culture.
Yeah, it grounds me too, bro.
We'll get back to the podcast in a second. The opinions expressed on this podcast are solely of the guest sharing or myself. We have no affiliation with any 12-step or recovery program. And if you do like our work, please consider visiting BILLWARDLIFE and supporting what we do. Now back to the podcast.
Yeah, I find when I mix the steps are my foundation
Yep.
of my life. But another foundation, if I can put it that way, would be the culture. And it grounds me in a way that I don't know if the steps do. But in the same breath, the culture keeps me humble.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to explain, but
I can relate to that.
yeah.
Yeah. It grounds me. And, like I get up, I give thanks. That's the first thing I do is I get up, I give thanks for, just to wake up,
Mm-hmm.
thank Creator for that. And, I get up, I do my smudge and, I pray. And I have that moment of, I don't have that as long as a morning meditation, but, it's still there, and, all throughout the day, I talk to Creator,
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that like that routine and that connection is, is what keeps me going as well. Because if I don't have that, if I start like slipping on any of that,
Mm-hmm.
then I know what's going to happen.
Yeah, dude, I hear you. What's your relationship like with all your kids now?
It's great.
And you have 8
Yeah.
biological and 3
Stepchildren.
stepkids.
Yeah. So, like growing up, like having kids, from like different mothers and stuff like that. Because I was like always in and out of like the system in gangs, living in different parts of the province and, in different provinces, I ended up having different relationships and stuff. So I that's why I have so many kids. My relationship with them, it was rocky growing up, with them because, let's face it, I wasn't a father figure, but now, like now that they see me, because I share freely about my recovery through social media, right? It's something I'm really proud of, so they see that and they see the change and like they can look at me and be like, hey, he's not just talking out his ass. He's being serious. He's living it. He's doing it. So it's like giving them that chance to put their guard down and to be like, hey, to be called Dad instead of Russell, or Russ or Ryder,
Mm-hmm.
It's like the relationships are building, and the ones that, because I have a son that lives in Ontario and then some that live in like Lethbridge and Brockett and stuff. Like my son out in Ontario, like we've always kind of had like a relationship, but it was never like we just called each other by first name. But like he calls me Dad now, and like he's given me a beautiful granddaughter, and like she's so precious, to be like, like that's one of my goals here coming up soon is to go out that way and go meet her and because like I talk to him on the phone all the time, but I don't have that face-to-face interaction with him, and I never have, right? Because he moved out to Ontario before as soon as he was done high school, he moved out there, and so I've never met him face to face, So it's something I'm really looking forward to. But that relationship with all of them is good. Like my oldest son Matt, he lives with us, and like I mentioned earlier, I can show him, like, hey. Yes, our past relationship wasn't the most healthy, but this is a healthy relationship that we're building now. Like he comes to meetings with me, and he'll sit down and ask me about recovery and about life, and I can actually give him good advice, and share stuff with him, and just be wholeheartedly honest with him, whereas before I wasn't because I was ashamed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. Like I'm thinking about listening to you, and then I'm kind of thinking about my own life, and like my ex-wife was always my kids' go-to pillar.
Yep.
Because I was not that healthy. Even when I was at my healthiest, I wasn't very healthy when I look back. Like it was full of anger and judgment and fucking a lot of hatred. But anyway, over the years, like my kids come to me. Like even my youngest daughter, this will kind of explain it. My youngest daughter's boyfriend, he says, your dad's the most stable out of all of your family.
Mm-hmm.
And they come to me for like serious life advice.
Yeah.
And I never tell them what to do. I don't do that anymore. I did most of my life, right? This is what I think you should do and do this. And I don't do that anymore. And I just let them, if they ask me for advice, I'll give it to them straight up, right? But it's such a nice feeling to know that they want to know what my thoughts are on whatever the given situation is in their life. And, it's something that I wasn't really used to, but I'm getting more used to it now. And like you've met Lucy before, but she was here when you popped in, and like she's pregnant now, right? And
Yeah.
she's going to have a little baby.
Nice. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks, bro. And like, our relationship is like, it's pretty solid. And it's not to say we don't have little bumps in the road. Like I've had bumps in the road with all my kids in the last few years, but we're able to at least work them out and talk them out and figure it out. And like with Lucy, like going through this new venture of her having a kid and being a mom, and, she's scared and excited and all these things. And my ex-wife came over a little while ago, like a week ago, and she said, she relies on you a lot.
Yeah.
So like be there for her. And I'm like, I'll be there for her, but I'm just going to be me, how I've always been. And I'm a little more conscientious that I know she needs probably more of my time.
Yeah.
But I guess these are the gifts, right? I can give her that, hopefully, and help her, but not take away the lessons for her either.
Yeah.
Right. And, I'm going to ask you this question. A lot of times through my own journey, I'll make mistakes, or I'll have to make an amend, or I'll, do something that I learn some pain, humility involved.
Yeah.
But then I use these experiences to tell my daughters about, so that they can see that I'm actually walking the walk and not talking out my ass. And then it helps them in their journey when they make mistakes, right? Do you use a lot of your own mistakes as your teaching lessons to your kids?
I do, and, they come to me, they'll ask me like, hey, Dad, like, when you were younger and you went through this, how did it affect you? Like, what did you do? And I let them know. Like I used to hide things from my kids, but I'm honest with them now. And that helps them. Because they need to know the truth on everything. So like, if it's a life lesson that I had to learn the hard way, for me to share it with them so that they don't make that mistake or go down that same path, then yeah, I use it definitely.
And even if they make the mistake,
I'm still there to be there for them.
and it's not even really a mistake if you're willing to grow and learn, right?
Exactly.
Like a lot of the mistakes you and I made along our journeys, they actually shaped who we are today.
Yeah.
We weren't ready to learn our lessons back then, or didn't know there was a lesson in it, and didn't see life like that at that time, but we do today.
And that's all that matters, is that we do today, right?
Yeah.
And we still acknowledge, like that, yeah, we didn't make some good choices back then, but these are the right choices we're making today.
Yeah. Yeah. And still not always easy, but with Creator, everything's way easier.
Yeah.
Right? Fuck.
Definitely. Like I always say, to like, even the guys I work with at work, I'm like, there's going to be days, even my kids, I'm like, there's going to be days that are like good and, things are going to be going good. But, there's going to be the days that aren't going to be so good for you guys, I was like, recovery is up and down, and life is up and down.
Mm-hmm.
It's what do you choose to do on those tough times,
Mm-hmm.
and on those tough days and in those tough times. That's either going to make you or break you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you choose to like reach out for help, or, ask that question and just be honest and humble, and, some people don't know what being humble is, because they're so used to the chaotic life,
Mm-hmm.
It took me a long time to find like even a little bit of humility and integrity, and, and just to tone it down, not be full-fledged balls to the wall,
Mm-hmm.
Just to help other people's like, yeah, I kind of got off track there for a second. But yeah, it's like, it's what you choose to do in those times.
And you got a lot of respect in the community, right? A lot of people look up to you and they respect you, right?
Yeah.
And you've taken that on. Like you're willing to bear that responsibility to be a leader, to be a spearhead, to like carry a message and show people that it can be done. Do you ever feel like that the pressure is burdensome, or do you feel like, no, I'm up for this and this is my job?
Definitely I'm up for this. This is my job, you know. I don't look at it as a burden. I look at it as it's just part of my journey. You know, it's a part of my journey. It's part of who I am today. You know, like being in jail, being in the gang life, and you know, being in addiction. I was always chasing something or following somebody. You know, was never leading my own. You know, and in today's life, you know, yes, I follow the Creator, but I walk my path, and I help other people instead of taking away from everybody all the time and hurting people. You know, I'm helping people, and I'm a loving person now. You know, you know, I'm there for, you know, I'm there for myself. I'm there for my family. And
Yeah.
I'm there for anybody that needs that help.
I like that you said I'm there for myself, and not in a selfish way, right? Learning how to love ourselves is the boundary that will set all boundaries.
Yeah,
And not having to justify yourself anymore because you love yourself and the decisions you make and the things that you say and the actions that you portray in life. There's no justification needed behind it because you can easily admit when you're wrong and make good on that. And you make decisions that you grow and learn from, but they're coming from a place of authenticity where you're good with who you are, and you don't really care if somebody else sees you a certain way because you know, and you know Creator knows.
Yeah.
And the people who love you the most, they all know.
the people that are close to me and the people exactly. You know,
Right.
you said I couldn't say it any better.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
So on our final, words out, a lot of times I like to get my guests to maybe give somebody some hope or inspiration, whether it be maybe people on the street or people in the pen. Like I work at Drumheller Pen and I try to help these guys
Yeah.
like take this path. And being in the pen, it's really hard
It
because
is.
you got to have these alter egos to try to protect yourself, right? And like
Yeah.
you said, like anger and violence is a tool to learn how to survive. But in this way of life, it doesn't work that way. We can't do that. So I try to inspire these guys in the pen to like take a chance. You know, let's look inside you. Let's build a relationship with Creator. Let's do the things that we know we need to do.
Yeah.
And but some of them just don't believe that life is possible. So whether it's like, you know, another father or someone on the street or another Indigenous man or someone in jail, what message would you have for somebody?
Oh, I got lots of messages, but you know, like the one that, you know, like I always think of, you know, when I run into people on the street, you know, I always, you know, you can like kind of tell where their mindset is, you know, especially even if they're like homeless or, you know, if they're struggling, you know, you kind of just like, because, you know, you've been there, you kind of pick up on it, right? You're able to like see it from like an outside perspective in a sense. So, you know, I see a lot of people out there, you know, every day they've given up, you know, and, you know, I was one of those people that gave up, you know. So, you know, as we go on in life and we start walking this path again, you know, like that desperation is there, but you got to, you know, it's what you choose to do with that desperation. You can let it be there and not do nothing about it, or you can grasp it and you can run with it, you know, because desperation is a gift, you know, and it's like what you choose to do with that gift, you know. With that, you know, you have so many people out there that also see that. You know, like the one thing is just, and I ask Creator this for every day. You know, I ask Creator this every day for everybody out there that's struggling, that they're able to like find that light inside of themselves, and you know, to hold on to it and to ask for help, and don't give up, like, yes, in a sense you've given up, but don't accept it. Like, yeah, I given up momentarily, but don't give up forever.
Yeah.
Like, just believe in yourself and just believe in the good, because there's a lot of good out there, and there's a lot of people out there that are there for you, that want to help you, and it just takes a hello sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, Mr. King, I really appreciate you coming here. Finally was able to track you down.
Yeah.
You're a hard guy to track down. But thank you for coming here and sharing some of your story with us, and what it's like to parent and be a parent, and what it was like for you being parented.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest things I think I see in your story is the strength of your father in your life, is the strength that you are now doing and portraying in your life with your children.
Yeah. I like that one good role model, that,
Yeah.
that I hold so dearly to my heart, right? And in my heart that, I'm able to utilize what he taught me.
Mm-hmm.
And, now that I'm in the right mind space, in the right space, and on the right journey to share that with my kids and with everybody.
Yeah, with everybody.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, bro. Thanks for inspiring me all the time, and doing what you do, and being a friend that I can call on and get to do these kinds of things. I think this is the third or the fourth time I've asked you to come speak and do something, and you're always there.
Yeah.
Right. And I know it's part of your job, and if the time's open, it's
I'm always
somebody's. Right.
I'm always here if you need me.
Okay, bro.
Just getting a hold of me sometimes. It's a little bit harder.
Yeah. Well, you're a married man now.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, thank you. Hi.
Hi.